Reno looked peaceful that night. Snow on the sidewalks, porch lights glowing like night lanterns. The kind of winter quiet that makes you think nothing bad happens here. But a few miles from the casinos and bright signs, a 19-year-old student was asleep on a couch in a friend's house. And within hours, she would be gone without a scream loud enough to wake anyone, without a struggle anyone could explain, and without a single clue that made sense at first. And here's the part that messes with people. She didn't disappear from a dark parking lot or a sketchy street or a place you'd warn your friend not to go. She disappeared from inside a home while other people were sleeping nearby her. So the question becomes, how does someone get taken from a living room in the middle of the night and leave behind a scene that looks almost normal? Because this story isn't just about a crime, it's about a citywide manhunt, a predator who moved like a ghost, and one mistake, one tiny thread that eventually unraveled everything. And the twist, the thing that finally exposed him, didn't come from a dramatic chase. It came from something so mundane it almost feels unfair. Today we're diving into a case that still makes people triple check their locks. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of true crime, mysteries, and cold cases delivered in story format, then you're in the right place, because that's all we do on this channel. So if that's something that interests you, please gently place the like button on a comfy couch, then remove the couch and act surprised when it panics. Also, subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss the next upload. Alright, let's get into it. In January of 2008, Reno was doing what Reno does in the winter. Cold air, quiet neighborhoods, and a college rhythm that didn't fully stop even when students were bouncing between school and home. That weekend, Brianna Denison was back in town visiting friends and family. She was 19, young enough that life still felt like it was opening up, but old enough to be building a real future. She was studying child psychology at Santa Barbara City College. And by all accounts, she was the kind of person people felt safe around, steady, kind, thoughtful. On the night of January 19th, going into the early morning of January 20th, Brianna ended up at a friend's house near campus. After being out with friends, it wasn't some reckless decision. It was the practical, normal choice. Why drive tired in freezing weather when you can crash somewhere familiar? She fell asleep on a couch in the living room, and that couch is important because the living room wasn't some hidden back area. It was the kind of room people pass through to grab water, to use the bathroom, to stumble around half asleep. But that night everyone else slept. No door was kicked in, no commotion, no shouting, no "what was that" moment. Just quiet. And when morning came, the house still looked normal. Until the people inside realized the one thing missing wasn't a wallet or a TV or a car, it was Brianna. When Brianna's friends woke up, they expected to see her right where she had been. On the couch, tangled in a blanket, maybe half awake, but the couch was empty. At first, the brain tries to be comforting. Maybe she stepped out. Maybe she went upstairs. Maybe she left early. People do that. But then the details start stacking up, and every detail makes the maybe feel dumber. Her belongings were still there. Her phone, her purse. The things people don't voluntarily abandon when it's freezing outside. And then there were signs that something had happened, even if the room didn't look trashed. Blood was discovered on a pillow. Not a horror movie amount, but just enough to make your stomach drop, because blood in a living room at sunrise doesn't belong to any normal explanation. Forensics later confirmed that the blood belonged to Brianna. Now the story changes. This is no longer a friend can't find her friend. This is someone was here. Police responded quickly because the scene didn't fit a voluntary disappearance. Investigators started looking for a forced entry, but the absence of obvious damage created a worse possibility. And that's when fear spreads in a way that's hard to stop, because the threat isn't localized to that one dangerous street. It's in the idea that a person can step into your normal life without warning and take someone out of it. And while Brianna's family hoped, because that's what families do, the city started to shift in a different posture. Doors locked, routines changed, people walking together, even in daylight. But investigators had a bigger fear, because the evidence didn't feel like a one-off accident. It felt like a pattern. When detectives looked deeper, this wasn't just a kidnapping case anymore. It started to connect to a string of terrifying assaults around the University of Nevada. The proximity mattered. The behavior mattered. The timing mattered. Women describing being grabbed suddenly, controlled fast, and threatened into silence. In at least one assault, the attacker drove the victim in his vehicle, then released her alive, but traumatized, with details that would become huge later. Some victims described a vehicle and distinctive items inside it. The scariest part wasn't just that he attacked, it was how he attacked. Fast, opportunistic, and confident. Like someone who believed the night belonged to him. And in cases like this, the public tends to do two things at once. One, they want to hope she'll be found alive. Two, they want control. What did she do wrong, so I can avoid it? But the truth of Brianna's case was brutal, because it didn't offer either of those easily. She didn't do something wrong, she just went to sleep. Meanwhile, tips poured in. People reported odd shadows, strange noises. Maybe I saw a truck. Maybe I saw a guy. Thousands of little maybes. Search teams combed areas around the city. People put ribbons up. The community rallied in a way that made it feel like everyone was holding the same breath. And then, after weeks of maybe, the case took the hardest possible turn, because someone not even looking for her found her. On February 15th, 2008, nearly a month after she vanished, Brianna was found in a field near Business Park in South Reno. The man who found her reportedly noticed bright orange fabric standing out in the brush. For a second, his brain tried to protect him. Maybe it's a mannequin. But then he saw it wasn't a mannequin. It was a person. The news hit like a collapse. The city that had been searching for everyone's daughter now had to face what everyone had been trying not to say out loud. An autopsy would determine she had been assaulted and murdered. Reports from that time described strangulation as the cause of death. And this is where grief turns into something sharper. Because now there isn't just loss, there's danger. Because if a predator did this once, he could do it again. The urgency becomes absolute. Investigators returned to the abduction scene and worked it like a puzzle, where the pieces are microscopic. They swabbed surfaces, they studied the entry point, they looked for anything that shouldn't be there. And the case began to hinge on two things. One, DNA evidence. Two, a trail of behavior patterns. Routines, geography. Because in crimes like this, you don't always catch the monster by watching the monster. Sometimes you catch him by noticing the tiny human habits he can't help leaving behind. And as horrific as this sounds, the killer had already given detectives something. Not on purpose, but because no one's perfect. Once Brianna's case became a homicide, investigation forensics leaned hard into what they could prove. They recovered DNA connected to the crime, an unknown male profile that mattered because DNA doesn't care about personality or whether a suspect seems like a good guy. DNA is brutally honest. The problem was the DNA didn't match anyone in the system, which meant the person responsible had either never been caught for something that required DNA collection or the right sample had never been taken. So Reno did something rare. The community helped fund the process to run thousands of backlogged DNA samples, because the city understood this wasn't just about one case anymore. It was about stopping a serial predator. Police also compared Brianna's evidence to other assaults, and that's when the pattern snapped into focus. The same DNA profile appeared across multiple cases. Now detectives weren't hunting a hypothetical suspect, they were hunting a specific person. Unknown name, Unknown face, but same biological signature. And this is where the story gets dark in a uniquely scary way, because once investigators know a serial offender is operating in a tight radius, they can map behaviors, they can predict, they can patrol, but the offender can adapt too. He can change routes, change vehicles, blend in. So the investigation became a race. Can the city find him before he finds someone else, or will they be too late? And for months, it looked like he might actually get away with it, because the one thing detectives needed most was the one thing they didn't have: a name. As weeks turned into months, the public pressure didn't fade, it sharpened. People weren't just sad, they were angry. They were scared, and they were exhausted from living in that mental space where every quiet street feels suspicious. The DNA still wasn't matching anyone in the database, and that detail is infuriating in hindsight, because it raises a brutal what if. What if the right DNA had been collected earlier? What if a prior arrest had triggered a sample? Would Brianna still be alive? That question would eventually become the backbone of something bigger, but at the time, it was just a maddening dead end. Investigators worked tips, thousands of them, but tips are messy. People misremember times. They confuse vehicles. They insert their own fear into what they think they saw. The killer remained a ghost. Until one day something shifted, not because of dramatic forensic breakthrough, but because of a human choice. Someone picked up the phone and said, essentially, "I think you need to look at this guy." A tip came in through a hotline describing a man whose behavior had raised alarms. Someone who allegedly had women's underwear in his vehicle. Someone who had acted strange when confronted. Someone who had moved and sold his vehicle after Brianna's body was found. That tip would steer investigators toward a construction worker and former Marine living in the area, James Michael Biela. But the problem, suspects don't always cooperate. And James didn't. When detectives contacted James, he wasn't eager to help clear his name. And when they asked for a voluntary DNA sample, he refused. Now, to a normal person, refusing a DNA sample in a case like this feels like basically walking up to a giant neon sign that says, "Suspicious." But legally, it's not always that simple. So investigators got creative. James had a young child, and according to reporting on that case, detectives obtained permission to collect a DNA sample from the child through the child's mother. Then they used it to determine that the unknown suspect profile was almost certainly the child's biological father. Let that sink in. Instead of the suspect handing over DNA, the science cornered him through genetics. Like the truth took the long way around and still arrived on time. That was the pivot. That was the moment the ghost started becoming a person with a name, a job, a routine, and an address. On November 25th, 2008, police arrested him. And once they had a warrant for his DNA, the final lock clicked into place. It matched. The DNA linked him to Brianna's abduction and murder. After 10 months of fear, the city finally had what it needed. Not closure, but accountability. The courtroom phase is where a case stops being rumor and becomes record. Brianna, taken from a friend's home in early morning of January 20th. Her body found February 15th. The DNA links to multiple assaults near campus. In 2010, James was convicted and sentenced to the death penalty. And that's where this story lands. Not in a clean ending, but in a reminder that the ripple effect of violence don't stop at laws. They don't stop at memorials. They keep moving. And even when a case like this ends with an arrest, the unsettling truth is that evil doesn't always look like a stranger in the dark. Sometimes it looks like someone sitting right beside you, smiling, pretending, waiting for the right moment you stop suspecting them. And that's exactly what makes the next story so disturbing, because when this woman vanished, her boyfriend was the one who raised the alarm. But the entire time, he already knew where she was. Trust me, you don't want to miss out on this one, and you won't forget it.